Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to episode number 31 of the Son of Man podcast. Today, it's going to be an awesome episode. I've got Bryon and Jennifer Harvey, all the way from the United States, joining with us, talking about marriage. And also, from my perspective, I'm actually not married, so we talked a lot about just dating relationships, things to look for before getting married, when to get married, a whole bunch of relationship advice, red flags, things to look out for, things that are important, how to have a good relationships, whether you're dating, married, not dating, wherever you're at with your relationship or relationships. This is going to be an awesome episode for you. I genuinely got so much out of this. This is a really just practical, to the point stuff you need to know to have great relationships in your life, which is a big part of what we do here at Son of Man. So you guys are going to enjoy this episode so much. I'm not going to waste your time. Without further ado, here's episode 31 of the Son of Man podcast with Bryon and Jennifer Harvey. Bryon and Jennifer Harvey, welcome to the Son of Man podcast. How are you guys?
They're doing outstanding. Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for jumping on. I'm excited for this one because as someone who's not married yet, I'm dating, but I think, so one thing I'm going to talk about more on the Son of Man podcast, the whole reason we do what we do is where the whole brand is based around ambitious Christians, people who have a calling on their life and want to make a difference for God. And I think having a good, solid, well, I would assume a good, solid marriage, I'm not there yet, but I would assume that'd be a big part of that and a big aspect of what people are doing with God's calling in their lives and everything. So I'm super excited to be talking about marriage today. So before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves, why you got into marriage ministry in the first place, and start wherever you want to start.
Oh, for sure. I'll go first. So I was actually a pastor for 20 years in churches and worked at a couple different churches and did a lot of marriage ministry in some pretty large churches and singles ministry. And one of the things that we found, we started doing ministry together in the churches, and we were doing a lot of premarital coaching, and we were talking to couples, and we were really finding some very consistent things that the same questions were being asked. And we're like, wait a minute, there's something here that why is God bringing this to us? And there's something here. And on top of that, we have other careers as well. So I'm in, here in the States, we have the National Guard, which is the part-time version of our military. So I've been serving in that for over 20 years. And one of the roles I had was a role of first sergeant, which is kind of a counseling role in the military. And I found that even people who don't share our faith were coming to me and asking me, as someone who's a little farther along in life, the same kinds of questions we were getting in the church, and we were helping guide those. And then Jennifer's career, also as an attorney, she's had a lot of opportunities to talk to people about their marriage as well. Why don't you kind of share a little bit about
That's exactly it. So just being in the law, I have had people come to me and someone has filed for divorce against the client. And in the States, we have something called no-fault divorce, which means you don't have to determine fault. If just one of the people in the marriage wants to get divorced, they're able to just go ahead and do that. So a lot of times you've got somebody who might want to work out the marriage, but the other one doesn't want to, so they have to get divorced because that one spouse wants to. And I've seen a lot of things in dealing with that. I think my favorite cases are when I have a client give me a call and say, you know what, you've done a great job, but my spouse and I have gotten back together. We don't want to get a divorce anymore, so you're fired. But I like that. It's a good thing.
Right. Yeah, true. Interesting.
So for all that, those three different career paths, we've seen a lot of consistent things in marriages, and people have been willing to share with us. As a first sergeant and Jen as a lawyer, they'll share things that they wouldn't even share with their pastor about their marriage, because a lot of times people want to look a certain way in church, right? So we've gotten to see all these different things, and they've been very consistent. And we really do feel that strong marriages build strong families that build strong communities. And if we can be a little part of helping that by helping people have stronger marriages, then we think that we've done something worth doing.
Yeah, great. That's amazing. There's some interesting backgrounds. You said you were like part-time military. Just super curious, not about marriage. Well, what's that like in like a week or month? Like, what's the logistics of that?
Yeah, for sure. So what we have what's called the National Guard. So I'm in the Air National Guard, which is a component of our Air Force. I enlisted that. So one weekend a month, I go and I put on my uniform and I serve and I do my military duty. Then at the same time, there's the commercial is 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, and that's your military duty. That doesn't really work out in reality, but that's what they like to sell people on. So I've had to go to different schools at different times, gone for months, and actually in when COVID was hitting the US really hard in 2021, July of 2020, I left and was in the Middle East, deployed, serving in the Air Force for 6 months. So it's...
That was an adventure. That was an adventure for him in the Middle East, and also an adventure for me. And, we have 2 kids. We have a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old. So that was an adventure for us stateside.
Right, because I assume you would have stayed here, right, in America? Jennifer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Where I was not a place you could have families.
Right. True.
That's it.
Oh, that's interesting. Interesting. Okay. I've been watching a whole bunch of me and some people I know are super into I'm not sure exactly what your role is, but just watching all the podcast interviews with Navy SEALs and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
It's the most insane stuff that happens. I'm super interested in it, but we don't have to drag on.
They do crazier stuff than I do. As the Air Force, we tell people we have the smartest enlisted because we send our officers to go fight. We put them up in planes and say, "Okay, we'll see you when you get back."
Oh. Wait, so what's okay? Well, we'll get to marriage, but I'm actually really interested. So sure, what's your role actually in the Air Force then?
Okay, so for me right now, I work in our Joint Force headquarters. I'm in logistics, and I've been in logistics my whole career. And so it started out working in a warehouse, just parts coming in, parts going out, and then I became a logistics planner, which was planning major deployment operations. How do we get the logistics, the people, and the materials to and from there. From there, I became a first sergeant for 6 years, where the role of the first sergeant is the commander is the officer in charge. The first sergeant is the eyes and ears of the commander and communicates the commander's intent to the enlisted. And they also are there to support the enlisted and help them. So a lot of it is, again, they're coming up to the first sergeant, "Hey, I'm having a problem with my wife or my husband. I'm having a problem with my boyfriend or my girlfriend. I'm having a problem with my boss. I'm having a problem with this." And the first sergeant is the person that's there to, "Okay, have a seat. Let's talk it through." Or if they need a kick in the backside because they're doing something stupid, well, that's our role too. And now I work in headquarters, where my job is to keep an eye on the logistics for the state of Michigan, for all the Guard in the state of Michigan, and report to the commander of the state for the Air National Guard the status of our logistics and how we're able to continue our mission here.
Interesting. I don't want to sound like a naive New Zealander who has no idea about American military stuff, but have you ever been on a fighter jet then?
So I supported fighter jets when I was deployed. There was an F-15 unit, so I got to sit in one while they were doing maintenance on it. But I'm not a pilot, so I don't actually fly in them. I've flown in several cargo aircraft, but the fighter jets, I don't get to do that.
Okay. Have you seen Top Gun?
I haven't seen the new one. We're waiting. We don't want to go to the theater when it's really crowded because of COVID, so we're waiting a little bit. But looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Okay, mean. Yeah, because I saw because I'm wow, these visual effects are mean. Then I saw the behind the scenes. I'm like, oh snap! No, they're actually just in jets, just recording, shooting a movie. Flip, I want to go watch that. But anyway, let's talk about marriage and all that sort of stuff. Get to marriage, but what do you think for people who aren't married yet, are in a dating relationship or are thinking or are single or whatever? What do you think are something obviously I'm going to assume the answer is basically everyone's different, but are there any common themes that you should be looking out for when to get married? When do you know you're ready to get married?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is. I want to say that this is almost the interview process for becoming a husband or a wife. There, right? So you want to make sure that the individual that you're dating and could be a potential spouse has good character. You want to have values that are aligned with each other, and I think it's really important for you to see each other under stress and how you're able to act together as a team. And I think that what's difficult in the way that we in the West seem to do a dating relationship is you go off by yourself to a really lovely evening where you might be seeing a movie and you're going out for dinner, and it's just this lovely kind of thing, and that's a fantastic experience to have. But where people are going to act in a not stressful environment, a private, really nice environment like that is going to be very different than how they might act, again, when they're under stress or they're facing some difficulties and challenges. And Bryon and I were involved in theater when we met, and it was really great to see how he was interacting with people during a dress rehearsal and during that tech week leading into the show. Just how was he managing stress, and was he angry? Was he being mean? And he wasn't. And again, I don't
most of the time.
I don't have a perfect husband, but I think he's perfect for me because he's a great guy.
Right.
But I think that those are some things to look out for people. And we always say that when people are married, they're supposed to be drawing each other more into holiness. And in the West, again, we have this big thing about I want to be happy in my marriage. But happiness is such a fleeting thing. But if you're pursuing holiness in that marriage and following Christ and growing closer together as you're growing closer to God, that's going to lead to that abundance of happiness and joy and contentment, and even being able to have a good marriage and a good relationship if you're going through some very difficult times.
And that doesn't leave out the attraction, right? I mean,
Right.
How you got started here is you found them attractive. There was something about their character, something about who they were. I want to get to know that person. And so what gets you together is that attraction, that initial attraction. But when you kind of asking when you're ready for that next step to make this a permanent situation, it's remembering the purpose of marriage is to grow in holiness. And you still want to have that lifestyle where you enjoy being around each other, because you're going to be around each other a long time. But that when you take it from the step of, it's not just I enjoy being with you, it's not just you give me something, but you make me a better person. And because of that, I want to be part of making you a better person and becoming together the people that God created us to be.
Right. And Jennifer, you said something about how we often go on dates about like going on nice, perfect dinners and stuff. Is there any way, I don't know exactly how to word it, but like, how would you actually go about, I don't know if you're not doing that, but how do you get in environments where it's not always perfect? Is there anything you can actually do, or does that just happen over time naturally?
I think sometimes it happens over time naturally, because a lot of times you'd be able to get involved in some of the same activities that you're doing together, whether it would be some sort of sporting activity or getting together with friends. It's nice, I think, to see how someone you're dating interacts with your family and how you interact with their families as well. And talk about stress, right? You're interacting with potential in-laws, right? They're interacting with their potential in-laws when they see your family. So I think seeing that can be helpful. And also if you're doing some things like going to in the States, we have the escape rooms, in you're familiar with those a little bit. Yep. So I think that could kind of show how the individual might be handling stress as well, because it's not that if they're handling stress in a not positive way that's necessarily the end of the relationship, but just see are they working on things, are they trying to do better? Because I hope that Bryon and I met when I was 17 and he was 18, and I hope that I'm a more mature person, down the road many years now after that than I was when we first met.
Right. I'm wondering, I didn't write this down, but I'm wondering how aligned, obviously I'd assume, talking about Christian relationships, you'd want both to be in church, right? But like, how aligned with other aspects of life do you think you need to be for it to be a good marriage? Like, for example, you both go to the same church, but how do you have to have the same interests, or do you have to be into the same sort of music? Like, how important do you think, or even like career, like how aligned do you think you have to be together with the same sort of things like that?
I think that's going to vary a lot with couples. And of course it depends. But I think really it comes down to, as a couple, what's important to you. So for instance, Jen and I do not share the same kind of music interests. Where
that's not completely true.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
I enjoy country music, and Jen threatens to open the door and jump out of the car if we're playing country music. She does, but that's not a deal breaker, right? So I think it's important to, what are those things that are near and dear to your heart. So if you're a musician, right, and your potential spouse doesn't enjoy music, doesn't enjoy listening to music, that's going to create some stress. Is that stress going to be something that's going to be a deal breaker for you? But you have to determine those non-essentials. What are the important ones? So obviously, I grew up, my dad was active duty in the military for 21 years and serving in the military. I couldn't be with someone that didn't think that the military was a valuable part of our country, right? So that's something that's important to me. There are people that think we should completely get rid of the military. We shouldn't have it. That wouldn't be a good match for me, even though we agreed on everything else, because those are things that are important to my life. So I think that's where you get those. What are the things that are really important? Do you like to read or not? Do you like going to movies? Are you more of an outdoors person, or would you rather your ideal vacation is going to the cultural center of another country and walking through museums all day? The things that are important and valuable to you that you're going to do. But also I think there's great value in, there's some things that I like to do by myself. I ride a motorcycle, and I just want to get on my bike and just be by myself and go away. And Jen's okay with that. And Jen likes to work out by herself. She doesn't like to work out with me, and she needs her time. Just yeah, we can do that. So having different interests is good too, because you're still individuals when you're a couple.
Right.
Yeah, well, I work out with George. That's George Michael, because that's who I like to listen to, the 80s pop star. So, he passed away. Bryan's not threatened, all good. But there we go.
Right. Do you think there's any, for dating relationships before getting married, is there any common red flags you'd see in those relationships? If they're doing that, that's a problem. And I guess it comes down to values, like you were saying, Bryan. But is there any that you've seen in all the couples you've dealt with? Any that stand out?
I think sometimes it's how the person would respond when they're angry, and how they treat other people, and not just your friends, not just their peers, but for example, you're out to dinner. How are they treating the servers? How are they treating somebody who could not really help them out, or somebody that it wouldn't be advantageous to be in a relationship with them. You want people who are going to have those values on that intrinsic value of each human being and human dignity. I think those are big things. And the other thing too is a dear friend of mine from school. She woke up one day and she realized, I'm 27 years old and it's time to get married. And it was well, no, it's not. Just because you're a certain age, or you've been dating somebody a year or two or something like that, it's you want to make sure that it's the right thing to do, because her just deciding it's time to get married, I can get along with anybody. It's that's just a recipe for disaster for a marriage. And unfortunately, she did end up getting divorced.
I think another thing I'd like to add to that is not just do you love them, but do you feel loved by them? Because some people, it's I love them so much, I want to be with them. But then it's very one-sided. And we've talked to couples well, yeah, but I thought when we got married it would be different. Probably not. If you're not feeling affection and love from them, if you're feeling like they value their sports or their friends more than you while you're dating, there's just because you said some vows in front of a bunch of witnesses doesn't mean that's going to change. So I think that's important too. It's not enough just to love them. You've got to feel loved by them.
But also, I think in that, being able to understand that different people can express love in different ways. And, you might be familiar with Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages, because sometimes that's something to talk to your partner about how are you giving love, but also how are you receiving love. And, one of the things is a big love language for Bryan is physical touch. And sometimes I'm just I've had to kind of adapt to that and just kind of walking past him in the kitchen and I'm touching him on the shoulder and stuff, but it's just that is just not naturally how I'm receiving love. But I think I've learned to adapt to that pretty well, and I'm understanding what he's communicating to me too.
Right. Yeah. I think I haven't read the book, but I've done the quiz a couple of times, and I think mine's probably actually changed over time, especially over time in my dating relationship.
Oh, it could. Sure.
I probably started one way, then now that I've been dating someone for a year now, I'm oh, actually, I kind of like different things. But
sure.
What do you think are the common elements of a good marriage? What do you think when you see good relationships and good marriages? What do you think those common factors are?
So we'll refer to our book, Operation Thriving Marriage, here, because that's really where we unpack this. But I think that the three things that are really important, one is understanding the purpose of marriage. And we talked about that a little bit ago when we were talking about dating. The purpose of marriage isn't happy bliss for the rest of your life. That's not why God created marriage. God created marriage, when you go back to the garden with Adam and Eve, two complementary people to fulfill their role as royal priests on the planet, right?
Right.
And so marriage, the purpose of that is to help us be more godly, be more holy. And in that, happiness and joy and the full life that Jesus promised us, that can be a part of it. But when you're just looking for, you need to make me happy, first of all, you're putting unreasonable expectations on your spouse because only God can be fulfilling. Your spouse can't. And you're creating an environment that is not the purpose of marriage. The second thing is what we like to call team marriage. And that means, think of your favorite sports team. We were actually looking up sports in New Zealand because we're trying to figure out if we could come up with sports analogies. And we saw netball and didn't understand that at all. But I do enjoy rugby. So
Right.
That's right.
You can use American ones. Like we basically, American sport's bigger here than New Zealand sport. But
okay,
go ahead with whatever you want. Go ahead with however you're going to say that.
In a good sporting team, so for I enjoy ice hockey. You know, you've got different players. You've got the defense. You've got the forwards. You've got the goalie. And everyone has to be on the same page. We're working towards the same objective. And we're presuming that everyone is working hard towards the same objective. In marriage, you have to have that attitude. It's not, you can't think for a moment that your spouse is trying to wreck things. It's like, okay, they may have done something. They may have made a bad play. They may have let the puck in the goal, and they shouldn't have. But it wasn't like they were trying to lose the game for you. They made a mistake. And so presuming that goodwill and presuming you're on the same team. And then the third thing is what we call unexpectations. Every fight you ever get in with a romantic partner, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or a spouse comes from an unmet expectation. Something you expected to happen, it didn't work out that way, and now you're dealing with it. And those unexpectations come from either unvoiced, you didn't tell them you expected it, and they can't read your mind. Unshared, you've got this family history that you thought was, oh, this is just normal. And so, yeah, it's not. And learning that, and then unreasonable. Sometimes it's like, no, the 50s era American television shows, the wife was home, and when the husband came home, there was dinner on the table every day. Well, that's an unreasonable expectation in 2022. And so you've got to work through and deal with those expectations, because you're going to have them. You're going to have expectations that aren't met, and acknowledging, okay, how did we get to here, and work through that. Those are the three keys we think that it takes to have a thriving marriage.
That's great. I think that's some really good practical advice that I think would be great to read the book and get a lot more. Because, I think that's super actionable. And it was funny as you're like saying that. I was thinking about my relationship. I'm like, that's so true. I can understand that. You were saying how marriage isn't just for just being happy, but there's actually a godly purpose behind it, on drawing both of you closer to God and everything. Do you have any advice on how to, for example, if you're in a relationship that loves God, but maybe might not be the focus of it? Like, how do you include that aspect into your marriage or your dating?
Yeah, I think it's just like working out at the gym. It's like you incorporate things slowly over time, or else you're going to pull a muscle or hurt yourself or hurt your partner there. So I think starting to pray together, and that might just be taking the moment to pray before you'd have a dinner or eat a meal together, and then from there building on that. And sometimes I found that when I pray with Bryon, there might be something that he's praying about that had happened during the day that we hadn't talked about. And that, I think, opens up a conversation for something like that to happen too. And that could, of course, happen if people are dating. Also, if you're able to attend a church together, that can be great. And if you met and you're at different churches, maybe you can you kind of alternate services that you go to at the churches, so that you can both go to church together, but it's every other week at one church, and then the other weeks are at the other church. I think that's a good way to be able to get involved.
Do you see that happen quite a lot with like married couples being at different churches or anything?
Oh, not married. Usually not married couples,
Right,
but couples
just
that are
dating.
dating, because
Okay.
sometimes it's you don't necessarily meet at the same church, or if
Right.
you meet just kind of outside of the church, you're not necessarily attending the same church.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think then are like common mistakes that you've seen with the couples you've spoken to that they make in their marriage? Like, what are the common ones that come up quite a lot?
So I think the biggest thing is thinking it's going to get better without work.
Right.
So it's like, oh, we'll talk about it. So Song of Solomon, there's a passage in chapter 2, and it says, catch the little foxes. All right, it says, our vineyard is in bloom, catch the little foxes that destroy. There's a lot of little foxes, and those are those unexpectations. Well, a lot of times in the church environment, oh, divorce isn't an option, so we don't have to worry about it. Well, the truth is, it is a legal option, just because
Right.
we don't want it to happen. And so thinking, oh, we're going to be able to work it out, so I'm not going to deal with this right now. I'm not going to worry about that. Especially when kids enter the picture, then it's like, oh, well, we're so busy with the kids, we're going to focus on that relationship. Your relationship with each other has to be the priority over raising your children, because that's going to be more valuable to your children. Your children are going to understand love better for them when they see the love between you. They're going to understand how husbands and wives should interact by watching you. Whatever example you're giving them is the example they're going to take with them. And so focusing on that, and don't be complacent thinking, oh, I love her, she loves me, it's going to be great, and our love will conquer all. That makes a great song, but love only conquers when you put effort into that love. And love is an action, not just an emotion. And I think that's the biggest thing in Christian couples is just, oh, that little thing that's kind of annoying but kind of cute in the first year of marriage, in the 10th year of marriage becomes the irreconcilable difference that means divorce. And so dealing with those early.
Yeah, and I think that just by analogy, marriage is not a plane that you can put on autopilot. So marriage works if you work it, but you can't just try to coast. You have to be purposeful about interacting with your spouse and what your behavior is together.
Yeah, so Div, when it comes to dealing with those common mistakes, would like the key thing be talking about problems as they come up like early, or do you have any other advice for dealing with those sorts of things?
I would say if there's an issue, talk about that as early and often as you're able to, and being able to talk to your spouse in a kind and loving and gentle and respectful manner. And of course, there are some things where you'd consider it to be not a big deal and you just let it go. But if it is something that is really bothering you, that is something to talk about. What's funny is with the book, Bryon drafted a chapter and he let me read it. And I found out after about 16 or 17 years of marriage that it bothered him how I squeezed the toothpaste. But it wasn't a big deal kind of issue.
Is
it's
that
just,
why?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I squeezed from the middle. I'm in big trouble. So, but he's the one who's squeezing it from the bottom and making sure that that's all perfect. But for him, it's not a big deal. It's not a deal breaker. It takes him a couple seconds to fix the tube because I apparently broke the tube. So at least in appearance. So that was just kind of something for him, at least. Okay, I'm just going to let this go. No big deal. If it was an issue, we'd probably be using different tubes of toothpaste. No big deal, right? That's an issue that can be overcome, but we've experienced kind of like a small group meeting about 8 people from our church that get together and kind of do a study and whatnot, and we've seen a couple in there, and it's like, okay, the wife is kind of badgering the husband and kind of talking bad about him and saying, well, he's not doing what he needs to be doing. And we're looking at that saying, oh my goodness, this has got to stop. And you two have to kind of fix things because this rift between you is just going to get bigger and bigger. And this is going to be a really big problem down the road.
I think 2 major takeaways from that are, one, a conflict-free relationship is not a real relationship because one person isn't being themselves. They're just receding and allowing the other person to run it. So the idea we're going to avoid conflict, that's not a strong relationship. And two, remember what the goal is in addressing it. The goal isn't to fix your spouse or fix your boyfriend or girlfriend. The goal is to have this conversation to bring us closer together. And so we're both probably going to change by the end of this conversation or the end of this long period of time as we're dealing with this stressor. But that's the big thing, is we've got to deal with it, not because I want to win, not because we got to fix this, but rather we've got to do this so that we can be a stronger couple, so that we can fulfill the purpose that God gave us.
That's some really good advice. And again, like, as someone who's not married but in a relationship, I can totally see what you're talking about, and I think those are some super important things. Obviously, you have an entire book. Is there anything that you think we may have missed, or anything that you'd like to add in that might be in the book that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, we do like to talk about communication, which is, of course, listening and also making sure that you're heard. And it's important. We've been talking about this for a while, that you want to make sure that you're listening in such a way that your spouse wants to speak to you, and you're speaking in a way that your spouse wants to listen to you. And I think that that's just a very important thing, because you want to make sure that you're being kind and gentle and honoring and respectful of your spouse, even if you're angry or even if it's a difficult situation. And I think a lot of times people, they don't know how to approach conflict all the time. And I think it's very good to be able to be vulnerable enough to say, this, I'm nervous about talking about this. This is a difficult situation, and I really need your help here. I had spoken to a woman who was doing our book as part of a small group, and she had just said to me, well, goodness, is it okay to disagree? And like Bryon had said, if you're not having disagreements, it's not a real relationship. But it's not a disagreement where you're in each other's faces and you're pointing at each other and yelling and being horrible to each other. It's instead, making sure that you're coming alongside your spouse, and then you're saying, okay, this is not us going at each other in an argument. This is us looking at this problem that's in front of us, and we're shoulder to shoulder, and we're trying to resolve it together in a positive way.
Right. And we've talked about it a little bit already, but obviously conflict and communication is a big thing of any relationship. And is there anything like common mistakes and ways to make that turn out the best way possible that you've seen in your life so far with other couples?
I think one of the things that's really important that doesn't get enough airplay, as it were, is understanding that the relationship changes, and that's good and healthy. I wouldn't want to have the same relationship with Jen that we had when we were 20. We've changed. Our life has changed. And there are going to be moments that it changes. And it's very common to look back on, it was so much easier before we had kids. It was so much easier when we were living in the small apartment. And it's easy to romanticize that. But it's going to change, and that's good and healthy, and you're growing into that. And I think a lot of couples get surprised by that. It's like, we thought that we'd already dealt with these things and that it would never come back. There's a theory from the 60s about groups development, the stages of team development or group development. You might be familiar with them. And it's forming, storming, norming, and performing. And so every group of people starts out, everyone's being super nice to each other because they don't know where they fit and they don't want to hurt each other's feelings. Then you go through a period of storming where, now people are trying to figure out who's in charge, what's the pecking order, where do I fit in the group? And once you get through that, you go to the norming stage where it's like, okay, now we know where everyone fits. Now let's start making sure that what we're doing is we're pressing through. But during that norming phase, there's very little trust, because we just went through a tough period where we were fighting all the time. And then when you get through that, you get to the performing, and that's the elite level sports teams, going back to that idea where they're winning the championship, the world championship, whatever that is, because they've gotten through that. Well, what people forget is that you're going to reform. You're not going to stay in performing. Tuckman, the guy who came up with that theory, said there's the adjourning, there's when the team ends. And if you watch sports franchises, there's a period where they are the pinnacle. I mean, again, for me, the Detroit Red Wings and ice hockey in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were the best of the best. And now they're one of the worst of the worst. That team ended. So in a marriage, it doesn't adjourn, but it reforms. We have to go back to, and we go through that. And what happens, though, is if you did storming well the last time, you'll have learned those skills to go through storming the next time better, and ideally shorter and healthier. But that's going to happen, and there are going to be those cycles. And when you know that, and you can look at each other like, yeah, let's look at the major changes. COVID, for instance, could be a major change stressor for all of us. And we had to storm for a while. How do we live together? In the U.S., divorces went up 40% during COVID because so many people weren't used to living together all the time. And so they were storming, not knowing how to function in the same house for so many hours a day. And they didn't navigate that storming well. But that's going to happen. There's going to be stressors. There's going to be things that it's going to keep coming back. But if you learn in that storming process, then when you come back, it's like, oh yeah, we're storming right now, aren't we? Okay, that's okay. That doesn't mean it's going to stop, but we're aware of it, and we're okay with this, and we can move forward through it.
Right, and I assume that's something. The more times you do it, the better you get at it, and the quicker those cycles become. Ideally.
The problem is when couples don't learn the lessons the first time and they go back to it and they go back to the same old habits. And that's where you've got to think about when you become aware. It's like, oh, how did we get through this last time? And did we learn the lessons we needed to last time? Otherwise, we're going to be repeating the same things over and over again, saying those phrases, doing those things that are triggering because I want to win the fight rather than, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to humble myself and serve my spouse so that we can draw closer together.
And some of those changes or transitions, they're not necessarily negative. It can be a very positive thing, like the birth of a child or a new job, or you move to a different home, and you might move to a home that you like better. Nevertheless, it can still be stressful and problematic. But also you can go through some difficult times in such a way that it's a positive. In other words, you're going through a difficult time and nobody likes it, but you're going through it together in a functioning way that's healthy.
Right. And those don't happen on like a regular schedule or anything, that those cycles happen based on life events, or what have you seen?
I would say life events, and I wish they were on a schedule so you can predict it, right? But you can't.
Put it in the calendar. Okay, we're going to start storming on January 4th.
Yes.
I wish.
Yeah, no, that's what I assumed. If you had like a single, what do you think is like the most important, if someone was going to listen to this whole podcast and you wanted them to take one thing away from it, about marriages or dating or relationships, whatever, what do you think that one thing would be?
Catch the little foxes. That thing that's bothering you right now, address it now. It's not going to get better over time.
It's going to get bigger over time.
It's going to get bigger over time. Foxes, I mean, they keep eating. So address it early, and remember when you're addressing it, you're addressing a problem, not a person. You're not fixing a person, you're fixing a problem that you want to address.
That's amazing. Is that the same for you, Jennifer?
I'd say absolutely. But the other thing, too, we are routinely asked, how can I be a better wife? How can I be a better husband? And I really think that comes down to you becoming a better Christian in your walk with Christ. That's going to help you become a better spouse.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you guys so much for jumping on. We'll do some rapid fire, but I just want to say, like, I've learned so much already just from this alone. I think I know everyone listening to this is going to take a lot away from this. And as I was saying in the intro, like, I think this was some really good, just practical advice on stuff we can take away and implement into our relationships. And so I'm super thankful for you guys for jumping on. Do you guys? Actually, I'll ask. Do you have anything you want to add, or should we do some rapid fire questions?
I think let's go with the rapid fire.
Let's go. All right.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
Great. Oh, I say rapid fire, but usually I sometimes get interested in stuff. We can spend 5 minutes on each, but we'll see where it goes. What is your guys' favorite book?
Oh, favorite book. That's a tough one. I love Shakespeare, so I like to read his plays.
True.
I just love to read, but I'd say if I had to say choose one favorite book would be C.S. Lewis' Screwtape Letters.
What's it called?
Screwtape Letters. The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis.
Oh, yeah, it's basically a mentor demon teaching other demons how to do bad things and how to mess with people. So it's kind of a neat perspective to take a look at from C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes place during World War II, and Screwtape is the uncle, and he's a senior demon, and Wormwood is his nephew. And his nephew has been assigned this Englishman to tempt. And it goes through the life of this Englishman, and Wormwood keeps failing. And it's really weird because as you're reading it, the enemy is God, because these are demons.
Right.
And so when the person goes and gets closer to the enemy, getting closer to God and what we would want them to, and Screwtape is advising Wormwood on how to keep this person from being closer to God and being a successful Christ follower, and how to make him more worldly, how to make him more tempted and uncomfortable and unhappy.
But then that could be super beneficial for a Christian to read that, right? Because that kind of gives you a different perspective of...
Well, and that was Lewis's intent when he wrote it.
Right.
He actually came up with the idea. I was listening to a podcast about it recently. He came up with the idea during a really boring sermon at church, and went home.
There we go.
And so he wrote this story, and it's like he's just talking about, hey, this is what I think it looks like on the other side of the story.
So if you're listening and you're bored in church, maybe you can do something with that, right?
God can use that too.
Right. That actually does sound super interesting. Don't know how much you guys are into podcasts, but do you have a favorite podcast?
Well, other than Son of Man podcast?
Right, of course.
That's what you're saying, other than that?
Right, yeah, obviously.
We have some pals, Dave and Ashley Willis. They do Naked Marriage podcast, and we were on their podcast last year, so that's a good one to do. So nobody's naked during the recording, I promise. We were there, everybody had clothes on, but it just talks about marriage, and that's a cool one.
My favorite one to listen to, I'm a big fan of N.T. Wright, and so there's the podcast Ask N.T. Wright Anything, and he's an English theologian, used to be the Bishop of Durham, and was, I think, if I remember correctly, because he was the Bishop of Durham, he was actually part of the House of Lords during that time in England, and kind of the pastoral representation, if I remember correctly. So he's just a brilliant older theologian and pastor that challenges me in so many ways. And just it's questions about literally anything that come up.
True, yeah. Okay, cool. If you guys could have any mentor, that's not God, obviously, dead or alive, anyone in the world, who do you think your one mentor would be?
For me, I love Abraham Lincoln. He's been my hero since I was a child. Just such a commitment to unity and preserving the Union and emancipation of slavery. I'm actually a volunteer attorney for something called Michigan Abolitionist Project in the States, and it's an anti-human trafficking, anti-modern slavery organization, and that's just been an awesome kind of thing to manifest that. And I really think that with Lincoln's just striving so much for unity in the country, we really need unity in this world. I just feel like in social media and in the world, there's a lot of loudmouths out there that are out there to criticize. No one's coming up with any kinds of solutions, and it's about us all coming together.
Right.
Yeah, I'd say I'm going to give two, because I'm going to look on the military side and in the ministry side.
Okay.
On the military side, I've been watching and reading a lot about George Washington, obviously the first president and the general of the Continental Army, and his ability to lead and hold people together, yet not be the bombastic whip people type of thing, but bring people together, yet still be firm enough to say, no, this is where we're going to go. His leadership is impressive to me. And then C.S. Lewis, who I mentioned earlier, he was brilliant, a great author, great thinker, and was so able to communicate faith in a way I wish I could just get a little bit close to, how he's able to communicate the truths of God to people in imaginative, creative ways.
Yeah, all of those books are great. I get a lot of, talking to Americans, I get a lot of George Washington's and a few Abraham Lincoln's. Those come up a lot, actually. But
interesting.
Well, as I said, I think that's so much jumping on. Obviously, you guys have a book about marriage. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. Sure. So our book is, and I'll just kind of hold this up here, we've got Operation Thriving Marriage.
Nice.
And what we like about the book is you can tell that with the graphics that we have, it's fine for a gentleman to have this on his desk, because we've seen a lot of books about marriage, and you've got flowers on them, and they're pink, and the guys don't necessarily want to have those out. But it is really about our combined experience in ministry and in military and in the law, and we really want this to be used to bless other people. And we've just been so excited about where the ministry's been, because it was God calling us to write a book and taking the time to do the research and get that in place, and then during the pandemic, having us on a lot of different podcasts, and love being on yours as well, but also starting to do some more live events. And we're looking forward to doing some traveling and to bring God's truth about marriage to churches.
That's amazing. Where can people find? Is Amazon, I assume? Is anywhere else?
You can go on Amazon, and again, it's Operation Thriving Marriage. You can also go to our website, which is operationthrivingmarriage.com.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you guys again so much for jumping on. I learned a lot from this. I think it was incredible just for me, but I know everyone who's going to listen to this is going to have some great takeaways, and should definitely check out the book, check out the website. All the links will be in the show notes down below. Everything they need to know will be all down there. Thank you guys so much for jumping on. I really had a good time.
Hey, thank you. We enjoyed it as well. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.